Imagine spending your entire life with someone, sharing the same house, the same plans, the same bed, building a family, keeping secrets, swallowing sorrows, watching time pass like someone watching a play where the ending is already written. Now, imagine reaching the end of that road and leaving everything, absolutely everything, for the one person he hated most. That's exactly what I did. And today, for the first time, I'll tell you why. I'm 82 years old. And if there's one thing life has taught me, it's that not everything that seems like love is true love. Not every ring on your finger means fidelity. And sometimes justice comes late, but still, it comes. Have you ever been there? Have you ever carried a pain in silence for so long that it became part of who you are? Stay with me until the end, because what you'll discover now may surprise you and perhaps even heal you. I was young when I met my husband. Back then, a man just needed a car in the garage and a nice suit to be considered a good catch. He had both, and an easy smile that could win anyone over, including me. We married quickly. We had children. We lived a life that, to the outside view, seemed enviable. Beach vacations, dinners with friends, birthday parties with family, and framed photos scattered throughout the house. But inside, inside was another story. Living together became a minefield. Small phrases that hurt, looks that weighed heavily, absences that screamed louder than any presence. I knew something was wrong. But back then, women were taught to keep quiet, to endure, to preserve their families at all costs. And that's what I did, for years, until the day I discovered the truth. It was unintentional. A call on the landline, a name whispered on the other end, the name he hated most, and which, ironically, was also the name of the only person who never turned her back on me. She was family, but treated like an enemy, a strong-willed woman who faced the world head-on and wouldn't accept his lies as truth. He said she was poisonous, but I saw in her what he never had the courage to admit: loyalty, genuine love, respect for me. That day was etched in my memory, not because of what I heard, but because of what I felt. It was as if all the masks fell at once. My entire life, I had lived inside a theater, but that afternoon, I stepped off the stage and began writing the script for my own story. For years, I kept everything hidden. I pretended I didn't know, that I didn't see. But time taught me that the worst prison is the one we build within ourselves. And then, without scandal, without an audience, without anyone knowing, I made my decision. I wrote my will, and I left everything. The house, the savings, the objects he valued so much, to the one he despised most. It wasn't a choice made out of anger. It was made out of love. Love for myself, for the woman I was, for the woman I endured being, and for the woman I allowed myself to become. Have you ever done something like this? Something that seemed crazy to everyone else, but made perfect sense in your heart? What happened on the day of the will reading is something I'll never forget. But I'll tell you about that in a moment, because now I want to delve even deeper into this subject. That look in his eyes at that moment told me more than any words could. There was no argument, no shouting, just silence. A heavy silence, full of history, of hurt, of things that had never been said, and that right then no longer needed to be. I stood there, feeling time almost freeze in the room. And it wasn't because of what I'd done. It was because of everything I'd carried until I was able to do it. Years of my life spent swallowing tears into my pillow, smiling in family photos, trying to be the pillar of a house built on quicksand. There's no way to explain in words what it's like to finally breathe a sigh of relief after decades of tightness. But maybe you understand. Maybe you felt something similar. And if, in any way, this story touched you, if it awakened memories, reflections, if it reminded you of an old pain or a decision that's still stuck inside, let me know in the comments. Share with me what has most impacted you so far. I read everything with care. And when you comment, you're not just sharing your story with me, you're helping others going through similar situations feel less alone too. Believe me, there are more people living in silence than we realize. Please leave a like too, because it shows YouTube that this type of content needs to reach more people. And if this kind of sincere human conversation, full of life and truth, resonates with you, subscribe to the channel. Here we share the stories almost no one has the courage to tell. and your presence makes all the difference in this journey. Now I want to continue telling you what happened after that reading of the will, because there, a lot changed, and not just for him. I'm 82 years old, and look, when I say I've seen a lot in this life, that's not an understatement. I've seen the world change in ways no one imagined. I've seen people leave before their time, and people stay when they shouldn't. I've seen wars begin in the silence of a home, and peace be made with a simple touch of a hand. But of all the experiences I've experienced, all the stories that have crossed my path, the one I'm about to tell, perhaps the one that has taught me the most about love, pain, and justice. And it wasn't easy deciding to share this. For years, I kept quiet, not out of fear, but because I thought that keeping certain pains bottled up was safer than exposing wounds that time can't always heal. But silence, when it builds up too much, weighs heavily. And over time, we learn that some stories aren't meant to die with us. They're meant to set us free. So today I sit here, with nearly a century of experience under my belt, to tell you what few know. And it's not out of drama or vanity. It's because I believe there are lessons that only time reveals. And if my journey can shed some light on yours, then it will have been worth it. My name doesn't matter as much as the truth I carry. I'm a mother, a grandmother, a wife for many years, and even with everything I faced, I never stopped caring for my family. I did what I could, like so many women of my generation, even when the ground seemed to be falling out from under my feet. We learn early to swallow our tears, smile in photos, keep the house standing while our hearts crumble inside. Not because we want to, but because we have to. On the outside, many people saw me as that firm, polite lady, always with a cake in the oven and a piece of advice on the tip of her tongue. But on the inside, there were stories only I knew, and one of them I had to keep to myself for far too long. Not because I didn't know what to do, but because sometimes courage takes a while to arrive, and when it does, it comes with a force that changes everything. Have you ever wondered what you would do if you had the chance to seek justice, not with hatred, but with conscience? Have you ever found yourself thinking about something you put off, and now seems too late? Because that's what happened to me. I lived my entire life trying to be the right woman, at the right time, for the wrong man, and only at the end, when there was no one left to silence me, did I understand that my voice could still echo, even if it was on the last page of the story. Now I want to go even deeper into this topic, because understanding how it all began is what gives meaning to what came after. Comment. That makes sense to me. When I met that man, he seemed the perfect portrait of what any woman of my time would have dreamed of. Elegant, polite, always with the right words on the tip of his tongue. He had that way of looking that made it seem like the world stopped just to listen to what he said. And I, with the naivete of someone who still believed that love was enough to sustain a lifetime, dove in head first. People said we made a beautiful couple. We smiled in photos, entertained friends, traveled when we could. From the outside, our life looked like one of those old portraits you find in a gilded frame. Perfect, untouchable. But the hidden truth lived in the silence of our nights. There were things he never said, but his gaze betrayed. Small actions that would go unnoticed to those who weren't close to him, but which, to me, were clear signs that something was off. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't slam doors, but there was a kind of emotional distance that grew like a crack in the glass, almost invisible at first, but which, over time, takes over everything. I became an expert at hiding these fissures, partly out of fear of judgment, partly because the mentality of that era taught us to protect the family image at all costs. I believed it was a phase, that if I was patient, loving, and understanding, he would return to the man he initially seemed. That was my first great illusion, thinking it was possible to change someone who never intended to change. Time passed, and that coexistence became an automatic routine. We woke up, had coffee, fulfilled our social roles, but it was as if every gesture was rehearsed. I knew exactly when he would make a sharp comment disguised as a joke. I knew when to avoid certain topics so as not to provoke his silent contempt. And deep down, I knew that the love he sold me in the beginning had never been complete. The strangest thing is that for a long time, I clung to the idea that it was still a happy marriage. We convince ourselves of so many things to avoid facing the pain of admitting we made the wrong choice, that we bet all our chips on the wrong person. It's like being in a smoke-filled room and insisting it's just a bit of dust in the air, until one day you realize you're suffocating. I remember an episode that sums up this life together well. We were at his company party. Everyone was praising how we were the perfect couple. I smiled. He held my hand. But with each compliment, I felt the grip on his fingers grow colder, more mechanical. It was as if he wanted to remind me, even there in the middle of everyone, that this closeness was just part of the show. It was that night that I understood that appearances were the fortress he hid behind, and that I, in some way, was also helping to build those walls. I can't say there weren't good times. That would be a lie. But even the good memories today are bittersweet, because I know they coexisted with truths I didn't know. He had a knack for doing the right thing when everyone was watching, and the opposite when no one could see. This duplicity eroded not only the trust I had in him, but also the trust I had in myself. And here's something few people talk about. When you spend too much time with someone who manipulates reality, you start to doubt your own perception. I wondered if I was exaggerating, if the problem was my sensitivity, if I was seeing monsters where there were only shadows. But life always provides clues, and over time, I learned to put the pieces together. This marriage taught me a lot about silent decisions, about how sometimes the most profound transformation happens when you're not yet ready to act. I accumulated small revelations, behind-the-scenes details that only I knew, and this shaped the way I saw everything. It's as if every detail, every unspoken word, every dismissive look was building the foundation for something I didn't yet know I was going to do, but that would one day become inevitable. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because understanding what he was hiding is what explains every choice that came later and how a truth can stay buried for years until finally coming to light. Comment there. I'm on this journey too. There was one day, just one, that completely changed the way I saw that man. It was an ordinary morning, or at least it should have been. I was in the kitchen, making coffee as I did every day, when I heard a murmur coming from his office. It wasn't the tone of his voice that caught my attention, but the way he spoke, low, quick, as if afraid someone would find out. I stood still, trying to understand. It was then that I noticed a detail that chilled me to the core. He wasn't speaking like a husband. He was speaking like a man hiding something. At first, I tried to convince myself it was just business, maybe a work conversation, a more delicate negotiation. But as the words sank into my ears, the truth began to form like a shadow growing unnoticed. There was a name I'd heard before, and not in a positive way. He pronounced it with a mixture of anger and desire, and it made me feel a weight on my chest like I'd never felt before. From that moment on, my perspective on him changed. It wasn't an immediate scandal. There were no shouting or arguments that day. Instead, I was overcome by a calculated silence, the kind that forces you to observe every movement, every gesture, every word. I began to notice the times he was away, the excuses he repeated, the small inconsistencies I'd previously overlooked. It's incredible how, when your mindset shifts, even the most trivial details begin to reveal hidden truths. A few weeks later, his disguise was completely blown. We were at a dinner party with friends, and in the middle of a conversation, he blurted out a sentence filled with contempt for someone who wasn't there. The curious thing is that, to others, it seemed like just an opinion. But to me, it was confirmation that there was something much deeper, a past or present he never wanted me to know, but which, somehow, was directly related to the person he so despised. The impact of that moment was silent, but devastating. It was as if the ground had suddenly changed texture, and I could no longer trust the next step. Trust, when broken, doesn't make a sound. It simply dissolves, leaving a void you feel every day. I knew I was faced with a decision: continue pretending I didn't see it, or start facing the revelations that were yet to come. And deep down, I knew that once you start pulling on the thread of a secret, there's no going back. There was also a day, shortly after, when I found something he'd left in his jacket pocket. I won't say exactly what it was, but I can say it wasn't just an object, it was evidence. Evidence that carried with it all the weight of betrayal, humiliation, and contempt one can inflict on another without raising their voice. I held it in my hands for long minutes, feeling the symbolic weight of its significance. I didn't cry. Not then. Instead, I saved it. like someone collecting an important piece of a puzzle yet to be put together. I've always believed that time has a way of revealing people, and in this case, he revealed it quickly. I didn't need to force anything. I didn't need to confront him immediately. His very actions began to reveal a pattern of behavior that could no longer be ignored. The coldness, the absences disguised as commitments, the distant looks during conversations. All of this began to tell me a parallel story to the one he insisted on revealing. This experience made me understand something profound about the transformation that occurs within us when we discover a truth we didn't ask for. You're no longer the same person. The way you observe the world changes, the decisions you make begin to carry a different weight, and even what once seemed important loses its meaning. It's as if you begin to live behind the scenes of your own life, observing each scene intently, waiting for the right moment to act. Now I want to go even deeper into this topic, because the way I dealt with this discovery was much more about who I decided to become than about what he did. Comment there. That makes sense to me. I clearly remember the first time I realized how much that name bothered him. Just mention it, even innocently, and his face would change. His jaw muscles would tense, his gaze would harden, and he'd divert conversation as if the mere sound of the letters were a threat. At first I thought it was an exaggeration, perhaps some old grudge or a misunderstanding from the past. But over time, I came to understand that it went far beyond antipathy. It was a rejection filled with resentment, almost as if that name were a living reminder of something he wanted to erase from history. This person, for me, always represented the opposite of what he saw. Where he saw problems, I saw courage. Where he saw affront, I saw truth. There was a rare strength in her, that ability to remain loyal even when the world tries to bend you. Perhaps that was precisely what bothered him so much, the presence of someone who wouldn't submit to the game he tried to impose. It was as if she were a mirror, reflecting not only his flaws, but also everything he didn't want to admit about himself. Their relationship has always been marked by a tense past. I wasn't present for every chapter of this story, but I gleaned enough fragments to understand that his contempt stemmed from something that wounded his ego. And when a man's pride is wounded, he builds walls high enough to prevent any attempt at reconciliation. In his case, those walls were made of silence and irony. Never an open dialogue, never a complete explanation, just that heavy air whenever her name came up. Over time, I realized that what brought me closest to this person was exactly what drove him away: authenticity. She wasn't afraid to speak her mind, even knowing the consequences. And for me, living with the truth, even when it hurts, has always been more liberating than living surrounded by comfortable lies. It was almost impossible not to bond with someone who shared this same mindset. There was one day in particular that stuck with me. We were at a family gathering, and, unplanned, she showed up. The air grew heavy, as if everyone simultaneously sensed the inevitable collision of two worlds that refused to coexist. He remained motionless, his lips pressed together, and didn't even rise to greet her. She, however, with impressive serenity, acted as if nothing could shake her. That scene, for me, was a clear portrayal of the difference between them. He trapped by the bonds of his own resentment, she free, even under the weight of hostile gazes. It was at that moment that I understood, definitively, that there was a hidden truth there, something he would never tell me. And I realized that this truth, whatever it was, didn't diminish the value I saw in it. On the contrary, it only reinforced my conviction that stories always have two sides, and that often the side least heard is the one that carries the most meaning. This realization became a silent turning point in my journey. From that moment on, I began to see him and her in completely different ways. He, for me, became the guardian of a secret that was gnawing away at me. She, the survivor of a story she didn't ask to live, but chose to face with dignity. It was inevitable that this would influence my decisions, even the most profound ones. The curious thing is that the more he showed aversion, the more I felt the need to reach out to her. It was as if my heart wanted to compensate, to offer the affection he refused to give. And this approach wasn't an act of conscious rebellion. It was a natural consequence of how I see people. When I realize someone is unfairly excluded, I feel an almost instinctive urge to reach out. This connection taught me a lot about emotional impact and how human relationships are built or destroyed by decisions made behind the scenes. I understood that sometimes what bothers someone most about another person is exactly what reveals what they fear facing within themselves. And that, for me, was a powerful revelation. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because this story, with all its layers, ended up being the trigger for a series of choices that would change the course of everything. Write it down. I'm on this journey too. Life always gives us signs, but we have this habit of ignoring what we don't want to see. And I, as impossible as it may seem to believe today, also closed my eyes to a lot of things, until one day, a single day, that made everything crumble inside me. It wasn't a scandal, it wasn't a cinematic fight, but a silent moment, laden with a weight only the heart can recognize. It was an ordinary afternoon, the kind where routine seems to swallow everything. I was in the kitchen, setting the table, when I heard laughter coming from the living room. But it wasn't a light laugh. It was the kind filled with irony, the kind that hurts more than any scream. And in the midst of that cold laughter, he said something. A short sentence, but one that seemed to contain years of hidden contempt. It wasn't about me directly, but about someone I loved and respected deeply. It was as if, in that second, all the pieces I'd been trying to fit together finally fell into place. And the image that appeared had nothing to do with the man I thought I knew. I stood there, motionless, as if I needed to engrave that moment in my memory. It was a snap, a tear in the curtain that hid the truth. From that moment on, no matter how hard he tried to hide it, I had already seen what lay behind the fine words, the calculated gestures, the facade he maintained before others. And when the heart is silent to hear the truth, there is no going back. Clarity hurts, but it frees. In that moment, I realized that the image of companion I'd carried was a fragile construct built on convenience, not genuine love. I'd been an unwitting accomplice to a long-running charade where my role was to keep up appearances, smile for the neighbors, pretend nothing was out of place. But that day, his mask slipped, and along with it mine too. I could no longer pretend I didn't see it. This revelation profoundly affected my mindset. It wasn't just about understanding that he wasn't who he claimed to be, but about recognizing that I had also ignored my own internal signals. The small feelings of discomfort, the unanswered questions, the butterflies in my stomach when something didn't feel right. I swallowed all of it because change required courage, and courage hurts. It was at that point that I understood. Real transformation begins when the pain of staying the same becomes greater than the fear of change. In the following days, I began to see everything differently. Gestures that had previously gone unnoticed now revealed behind-the-scenes details I had never imagined. Silences that I had interpreted as fatigue, I realized were strategies to avoid the truth. Small, everyday decisions that had seemed trivial now revealed a clear pattern of control and manipulation. It was as if my life had been filmed in black and white, and suddenly I was seeing them in vivid color, colors that revealed even the most hidden blemishes. This moment of clarity didn't just bring me pain, it also brought unexpected strength. When you see the truth, you can no longer be the same person. It's as if an inner door opens, and even though the world outside is still the same, you no longer step into it the same way. I began to reflect on every choice I made, every word I swallowed, every time I failed to assert myself to avoid conflict. The truth is that, for years, my life was molded to fit the space he determined, and I accepted it because it was easier to believe the illusion than to face the impact of waking up. And, strange as it may seem, this clarity also brought me peace. Peace, because finally, I had something concrete. It was no longer a vague feeling, no longer that undefined discomfort. I knew, and knowing gave me power. The power to decide, the power to rebuild, the power to look forward with a new mindset. I no longer needed his approval, nor the theater we lived in. I could finally reflect on my journey authentically. This transformation wasn't a bolt of lightning that struck me and changed everything in one day. It was the first step on a long journey, filled with discoveries, revelations, and yes, moments of relapse. Because seeing the truth is one thing, living from it is another. But that day, the first brick in the wall that surrounded me was knocked down. And the feeling of seeing the horizon for the first time in a long time is something I'll never forget. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because what happened from that moment on changed not only my relationship with him, but also how I began to see myself as a woman, as a human being, and as someone who still had the power to write her own chapters. Comment: that makes sense to me. Writing that will wasn't an impulsive act, nor something done in the heat of a passing emotion. It was, in fact, a silent process, built over days, months, maybe even years, as I gathered each piece of my story and weighed it. At first, the very idea caused a tightness in my chest, as if I were betraying something I'd promised myself, or the life I'd tried to sustain for so long. But as time passed, and I looked more clearly at everything I'd experienced, I realized it wasn't about revenge. Revenge is fueled by anger, and mine had already transformed into something else. What I felt was the need to seek justice. There was a weight that followed me daily, as if each unresolved memory weighed me down. And when you reach your 80s, you begin to understand that there's not much time to put off important matters. It's no longer about waiting for the right moment. The right moment is now, because there may not be a tomorrow to fix what's gone wrong. And so I began to consider, with an almost frightening calm, the possibility of completely changing the course of what I would leave behind. I clearly remember the day I sat in my favorite armchair, a notebook on my lap, and wrote the first draft. It wasn't numbers, it wasn't possessions. It was the essence of what I wanted my departure to mean. I didn't want my last act in the world to be the continuation of an unjust cycle. I wanted to break the pattern, leave a silent message, yet one strong enough to echo for a long time. And for that, I needed courage. Courage to face not only his reaction, but also the judgment of others. Because when you do something that goes beyond expectations, there will always be someone ready to question your decisions. It was a profound mindset exercise. I asked myself, if I weren't afraid, what would I do? And the answer was always the same. I would do exactly that. And somehow, this realization brought me peace. Peace because I knew my choice was aligned with my truth, with the revelations I'd had along my journey, and with the impact I wanted to make after I was no longer here to explain my reasons. Of course, there were moments of doubt. In the silence of the early morning, I found myself wondering if it wouldn't be easier to leave everything as it was, avoid the confusion, and take the simpler path. But deep down, I knew the simpler path wasn't the right one. The right thing, in that moment, was to honor my own story and also the dignity of the one he despised most. Because there was something greater than our personal conflicts. There was a symbol of loyalty, of recognition, and of true love. The curious thing is that as this decision matured, I began to notice small changes within myself, as if, by taking ownership of my own destiny, I was also freeing myself from a weight I'd carried for decades. It was like opening a window after years of being locked in a stuffy room. Fresh air rushed in, and with it came a renewed sense of purpose. I was about to do something he might never understand, but which, deep down, didn't need his approval to be valuable. When I finally sat down before the lawyer to formalize everything, I felt my hands tremble slightly. Not from insecurity, but from the awareness of the moment. It was more than signing papers. It was writing the final chapter of a story that, for too long, had been told by someone else. And now, for the first time, I was in complete control of the final words. The room was silent, only the sound of the pen scratching the paper, and inside me was a strange mixture of melancholy and relief. Melancholy for knowing I had to get to this point, and relief for having finally found a way to balance things with life. What many people don't understand is that some decisions aren't made for the present, but for the future. And in this case, the future I envisioned was to leave a clear message for those who came after. No one has the right to erase or devalue another person's truth. I wanted this gesture to be a kind of beacon, a reminder that courage and love can go hand in hand, even when the world expects you to choose one. This choice didn't erase the past, but it completely changed its meaning. Today, when I reflect on it, I feel no regret. I feel that, in one simple act, I managed to gather all the transformation I've experienced, all the difficult decisions, all the hidden truths I've had to face, and condense it all into one final gesture. And maybe, just maybe, this was the most honest chapter I've ever written about myself. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because what came after this signature showed me that some choices, even silent ones, have an impact that goes far beyond what we imagine. Write it down. I'm on this journey too. The room was full, but the air felt dense, as if each breath took more effort than usual. The long table in the center separated those who waited expectantly from those who knew, deep down, that something unexpected was about to happen. The heavy curtains let in only a shaft of light that cut diagonally across the room, illuminating dust particles suspended in the air, almost as if time had stood still. The lawyer, with his slow, precise tone, began to read the will, and with each sentence, it was as if the sound echoed deeper within me. I watched the faces. Some tried to remain neutral, but the slight arch of an eyebrow, the tapping of impatient fingers on the arm of the chair, betrayed nervousness. Others couldn't hide their voracious interest, leaning forward, as if to devour every word before it was even uttered. And then there was him, sitting, hands clasped, eyes fixed on a random spot on the table, as if bracing himself to hear something he didn't want to believe. When her name appeared, the air seemed to shift. It was as if the temperature had dropped a few degrees in that instant. The lawyer continued reading, explaining the details, the conditions, the share that would be allocated to her. And it was at that moment that I saw his gaze change. It wasn't a sudden movement. There were no shouts, no questions. But there was something in that silence that spoke louder than any words, a mixture of surprise, disbelief, and, perhaps, an old wound reopened in front of everyone. He said nothing, not a single word, but I saw it. I saw a whirlwind of thoughts in his eyes, an inner conflict so strong it was almost audible. That was the hidden truth he'd never wanted to face, materialized in front of everyone. And she, the person who had been rejected for so long, stood her ground. She didn't smile. She didn't celebrate. She simply took a deep breath, as if it were the first time in years that air had fully entered her lungs. The rest of the room seemed torn between surprise and discomfort. Some cast quick glances at me, trying to decipher my intentions. But I didn't move. I remained there, serene, certain that every line of that document was the result of a deliberate decision, a journey I'd taken alone, between painful memories and transformative revelations. As the lawyer continued, I felt the symbolic weight of that moment. It wasn't just a matter of assets or inheritance. It was an act of affirmation, a silent but powerful message about loyalty, about decisions that shape the legacy we leave. It was as if, in that moment, everything that had been stifled for years had found a channel to manifest itself. I knew that from that moment on, nothing would be the same. There would be backstage conversations, sidelong glances, stories retold with different versions. But that didn't matter to me, because the essence of what I wanted to convey was already engraved. That moment had an impact that no argument could erase. And curiously, as I watched his reaction, I realized my gesture wasn't just about what she deserved, but about what he needed to face. The mirror he'd always avoided was now before him, reflecting not only what I'd done, but what he'd failed to do, and there was no escape. The atmosphere remained tense until the end of the reading. The chairs creaked slightly as someone shifted, but silence prevailed, broken only by the lawyer's firm voice. When it was all over, there was an awkward moment, almost as if everyone was expecting him to say something. But he just stood up, slowly, looked at me for a second that seemed to last an eternity, and left the room without looking back. That look, I'll never forget it. Not because there was hate in it, but because there was something deeper. It was the look of someone who realized, too late, that the narrative was no longer under their control. And that, perhaps, was the greatest revelation of all. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because what happened after that day revealed layers I never even imagined existed, and exposed truths that changed everything irreversibly. Comment below. That makes sense to me. The reaction came like a wave. At first silent, then filled with murmurs, exchanged glances, and expressions that revealed more than any words could. It was as if, in that instant, every person in the room was trying to mentally reorganize the story they thought they knew. Some kept their chins up, trying to hide their shock with a rigid posture, but the rigidity only betrayed the impact. Others looked away, perhaps out of embarrassment, perhaps because they didn't know where to stand. Some called me crazy, with that muffled whisper we pretend not to hear, but that cuts deep. It was their way of dealing with breaking a script everyone thought was predictable, crazy for having done something so unexpected, so outside the norm they knew. But I knew that often, crazy is just the label they place on those who have the courage to break a cycle no one dares question. And there were those who hugged me, crying. People who, perhaps, didn't know all the details, but who felt the weight of that decision firsthand. People who recognized in it not just an action, but a lifetime of silence, of swallowing words, of watching injustice repeat itself. These hugs were different. They weren't meant to console me. They were meant to thank me, because somehow my courage also freed the stories they themselves held. The tension was so thick you could almost hear each other's thoughts. In every corner of the room, small groups formed, exchanging quick impressions, as if searching for an immediate meaning to what had just happened. But the truth is, there was no easy explanation. The truth is rarely simple. It comes laden with layers, memories, and choices that cannot be seen from the outside. I observed everything with a calm that surprised even myself. It was as if, for years, I had been rehearsing this moment without realizing it. My body didn't tremble. My voice didn't waver. What I felt was a mixture of relief and firmness, a state only achieved when we understand that the decision has already been made and there is no turning back. Of course, there was also anger in the air. Anger from those who expected a different outcome, from those who felt betrayed by the broken expectations. This anger came not just from what I'd done, but from what it meant, a reversal of power, a nagging reminder that no one controls the entire story, and that for some is more painful than losing any material possession. His silence, which had already struck me during the reading, continued to resonate, but now, amidst the reactions of others, it seemed even heavier. He wasn't looking at me, but I felt that every word spoken by others, every look directed at me, was also an indirect message to him. And perhaps, deep down, that was exactly what I wanted, for him to understand that the consequences weren't just mine, but ours. In the midst of all this, I realized that my decision didn't just affect him or her. It affected everyone around them because it exposed something many preferred to keep hidden, the truth about what really goes on behind the scenes in a family. And when that truth comes to light, no one emerges unscathed. It's like opening a window in a room that's been closed for years. Air rushes in, dust rises, and for a while everyone feels uncomfortable until they can breathe better. Some came to talk to me later, trying to understand better. Their questions were direct, but what I read in their eyes was deeper. Would you do it all over again? And the answer was simple, yes, because every choice I made that day was more about integrity than equity. It was about showing, to me and to them, that there are things that cannot be bought or silenced. And as the room emptied, I still felt the weight of every reaction, every gesture. It wasn't sadness, nor regret. It was a different kind of responsibility, as if I were now the guardian of a new version of history, one that no one could erase, a version that, even for those who didn't accept it, was already written and sealed. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because what unfolded in the following days was even more revealing than that moment, and showed the lengths people are willing to go to defend their truths or confront the lies they carry. Write it down. I'm on this journey too. When everything calmed down on the outside, or at least seemed to, I realized the real storm was raging inside me. People looked at my decision as if it were a sentence against him, as if it were merely an act of confrontation. But the truth is, if anyone really paid attention, they would see it wasn't about him. It never was. This was about me, about the weight I'd carried for years, about the words I'd swallowed, about the choices I'd postponed to maintain a peace that deep down never existed. I needed to do it not to prove anything to anyone, but to look in the mirror and feel that finally I had made a decision aligned with my own truth. You know how you spend so much time trying to fit in, trying not to bother anyone, trying not to be the source of conflict, until you realize that, in the process, you've been distancing yourself from yourself? Well, yes, I was there, at the exact breaking point between continuing to live in silence or choosing, once and for all, the dignity I deserved. It wasn't easy. It's not easy to break patterns that have shaped you for so long. We're trained to believe that keeping up appearances is safer than telling the truth, that it's better to conform than to face discomfort. But there comes a time when this mindset no longer applies, because the pain of continuing is greater than the fear of change. And that's exactly where I was when I wrote those words in my will. The decision was my silent scream, a way to put on paper everything I'd never been able to say out loud. And it wasn't about revenge, retribution, or getting even. It was about liberation, about putting an end to a story that, having imprisoned me for so long, had ceased to make sense. It was about allowing myself to breathe without feeling the constant weight of a past that diminished me. I learned that inner peace doesn't come when everything around you is calm, but when you find the strength to remain steadfast even in the midst of chaos. And in that moment, even with everyone's eyes judging me, I felt at peace. A peace that wasn't easy because it came with loss and detachment, but it was true. And truth. Oh, truth has a value that only those who have lived through years of lies can understand. The strangest thing is that when you make a decision like this, many people walk away, and that's okay. Because along with courage comes the clarity that not everyone will embrace your new version. It's like shedding your skin. Those who knew you from the old one might not understand what you've become. But deep down, it's necessary. It's through this natural filter that only those who truly see your worth remain. This journey showed me that dignity is not negotiable. You can compromise on small things, compromise here and there, but when you start negotiating who you are, your essence, there's no longer room to flourish. And that's what I refused to do at that moment, to continue existing only halfway. Many people asked if I regretted it. No, I didn't. Because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't living to meet other people's expectations. For the first time, my choice was mine alone. And that, for me, is freedom. It's a kind of victory that isn't measured in possessions or recognition, but in how you can lay your head on the pillow and sleep, knowing you honored who you are. Of course, there were nights when memories came like daggers, when I wondered if I could have done it differently. But soon I remembered. I did what needed to be done, not to hurt, but to heal. Not to erase anyone, but to stop erasing myself. This is the part few understand. The decision was the end of a cycle, but above all, it was the beginning of a new life. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because understanding what came after this decision is as important as understanding the moment in which it was made. It's in the aftermath that we see the true impact of our choices and discover how far transformation can take us. Comment, that makes sense to me. You know, sometimes I think about how difficult it is to put into words that feeling of being at a crossroads. Not the kind that suddenly appears, but the kind that life builds little by little, brick by brick, without us even realizing it. It's as if every silent choice, every time we swallow our own will to please someone, is another step deeper into a labyrinth. And then comes a day when you look around and realize you're lost, and the way back no longer exists. That's exactly how I felt. It wasn't just about a one-off decision. It was about a lifetime of expectations that weren't mine, and that somehow had shaped my steps, my way of speaking, even the way I saw myself in the mirror. There's an invisible weight that only those who have lived it can explain. The weight of carrying what's expected of you, even when it suffocates who you truly want to be. And no matter how hard I tried, there was no way I could continue living like this without feeling like I was betraying myself. With each time I said it's okay when I wasn't, with each polite smile that hid the urge to scream, I distanced myself a little further from who I truly was. It was then that I realized it's not what people do to us that destroys us, but what we allow them to do, day after day, while pretending everything is fine. Making the decision I did was like breaking a chain. And no, it wasn't a beautiful, calm, or poetic moment. It was painful. It was intense. It was the kind of pain that comes with relief, like finally taking a deep breath after years of holding it. It's strange, but sometimes freedom hurts because it comes with fear. The fear of disappointment, the fear of losing people, the fear of being alone. But deep down, when your heart knows it can't go on anymore, any other path is just a way of postponing the inevitable. I needed to let go of the image others had of me. And that's harder than it seems, because we end up confusing approval with affection. But true affection doesn't require you to diminish yourself to fit in. True affection accepts you in your entirety, with your flaws, your failures, and your truths. And it was this clarity that made me understand that I couldn't continue living by someone else's expectations. I needed, for the first time, to live for myself. And it's funny. When we decide to put ourselves first, it seems like the whole world starts testing whether you're truly willing to stick to that decision. People try to make you back down. Situations reappear as if they were traps, and even your own mind tries to negotiate with itself. Isn't this too much? Isn't it better to give in just one more time? But then I remembered what was at stake: my peace, my dignity, my story. And when you understand the value of that, there's no longer room for negotiation. Ultimately, it's not about winning or losing. It's about staying true to what you know is right, even when that means walking alone for a while. And honestly, walking alone isn't the worst fate. The worst is walking with people who just want you to follow the path they've chosen. Loneliness may be temporary, but the loss of yourself, that can last a lifetime. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because there's a detail few people realize. When you free yourself from something that was imprisoning you, it's not just your life that changes. Your energy changes. Your relationships change. Opportunities change. It's as if the universe responds to this new stance, as if each decision aligned with your truth opens doors that previously hadn't even existed in your field of vision. And that's exactly what I began to experience. Small things that previously went unnoticed began to have meaning. New people appeared, not to fill a void, but to share a journey. Deeper conversations began to happen because I was no longer in automatic mode, but present, whole, willing to live each experience consciously. And this transformation isn't something you can explain in a few words. It's something you feel. It's in the silence of the night, when you no longer need to rehearse dialogues in your head to justify your choices. It's in the spontaneous smile that appears without anyone noticing. It's in the calm certainty that, despite all the difficulties, you are exactly where you should be. If you've ever felt trapped between what's expected of you and what your heart knows is right, you understand what I'm saying. Because this isn't just my story. It's the story of many people who, at some point, have to choose between pleasing the world or respecting themselves. And as difficult as it may be, I can assure you, choosing yourself is never a mistake. Write in the comments, "This story is for me." If you've stuck with me this far, I think you've already sensed that this space is about sharing experiences that make us think and in some way transform. So if this video brought you some clarity, if it made you reflect or even reconsider a choice, subscribe to the channel to continue walking with me on this journey. I'd love to know who made it to the end, so leave a comment. I'm with you until the end. And of course, leave a like, not only because it helps the channel grow, but because it shows me that this conversation resonated with you. Oh, and while we're at it, there's a video here that complements this topic. Click and stay with me there.